Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts, Caroline Pettit and Ebony Adams.
Hey. Hello.
This week's show is going to be a little different than usual, and not in the way that last week's episode was different. Today, we're going to be talking about a nation at war. Stay with us. All right, Ebony, do you want to get into what we're talking about this week?
Yeah. We're recording this episode, just so folks know, on May 31st, 2020. This week, the white supremacist American state apparatus that includes law enforcement, the military, mainstream news outlets, and our corporate political machine have released the hounds of war against a population rightfully and righteously activated by the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, as well as so many other Black people. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade. Cities are on fire. Paramilitary forces are firing on, beating, torturing, harassing, and assaulting protesters that are taking part in demonstrations, but also people on their porches, bystanders in the area. They are demonstrating in real time that their power is unlimited and it is unchecked. Today, on the 99th anniversary of the Tulsa race riots, we want to share with you some of what we've seen, resources that might help you take action, and ways to make sense of some of the conflicting narratives that we've been fed. I want to note that this episode is top to bottom one big content warning, but I do also want to emphasize that there are things that we bring up, things that we say that provoke discomfort and unsettling emotion in you. If you can, please sit with it. It may be instructive, it may be illuminative, there may be a reason why you feel that discomfort, and we want you to work through it. But if this is something that is too emotionally heavy for you, and I know that's the case for many of our Black listeners and our listeners of color in particular, we are not putting any kind of additional burden on you. You can come back to this, you can bypass it entirely. This is the real self-care. But this is an important episode for us to do. We're not going to pretend like business is as usual, because the reality is there's never been business as usual for some people, or the business as usual has always been murder, mayhem, and terror. So today's episode.
Yeah. So before we actually dive into some of what we wanted to talk about, I think it might be useful for us to pull back the curtain on our own process, because right before we started recording, we had a little conversation and conflict about like who should read that intro. And the reason I wanted us to sort of talk about that is because I think that this is part of the work of like figuring out how to navigate, being responsible for these conversations, being allies in these spaces. Like, what does that look like? So Ebony wrote this intro. Ebony suggested this episode. And as I was reading it, I thought to myself, well, I shouldn't read it. I should let Ebony lead the conversation as, the Black woman on our team. But Ebony pushed back, right?
Yeah, because, I was like, listen, the reality is we have a certain structure of our show that people have come to expect. And so if we deviate from that in a significant way, I'm the de facto host of the episode and the subject is what it is. There's a chance, a likely chance perhaps, that people are going to be like, oh, this is the Black episode, so you got the Black host to talk about it. And the danger in that is that it continues to reinforce the notion that there are issues that certain groups should and do care about more than other groups, and that the work of making the change that's necessary should continue to fall upon those people. I'm glad you wanted to talk about this, Anita, because there's something happening in this moment right now, and that is increasingly become apparent as we, as activists, as organizers, as progressives, to whatever degree and whatever stripe, do the work of unlearning the bullshit that we've been taught. And that thing that's happening is that you have, white so-called liberals, many times, self-declared progressives, who turn to people of color in moments like this, and they're like, teach me, right? And I'm not saying that's what you're doing here. I'm saying this is part of a larger conversation, right? So I want you to pay attention to, in this moment, the people who are like, okay, you want to learn how to be anti-racist? Here's some readings you can do. You want to learn how to do direct action and participate in direct action? Here's, the things that you need to know. You want to learn like about the history of police violence in this country? Here's some movies you can watch, etc. Like, overwhelmingly, it's people of color, it's Black people who are producing that knowledge, that's archiving that knowledge, that's gathering that information and sharing it. And yes, absolutely, we should be led by these people. Like, yes, we should have the mic right now, Black people. But ask yourself, like, okay, what is my role here? What is my responsibility here? Because if I'm constantly deferring to other people, not just their knowledge, but their labor, what does that say about my commitment to this issue? So, as we were talking about, like, okay, who's going to intro this episode? I was like, we don't want to give the impression that we're doing that same thing, right? That like, this was my conversation and I'm just like bringing you into it and I'm going to give a 40-minute webinar on anti-racist work. I mean, you say that like, I brought this episode up. Yeah, because like I'm struggling right now, but it wasn't as if I had to like talk y'all into it, and like argue for it. This is the work that Feminist Frequency does. And so it was more just like, listen, I can't pretend that I give a shit about, whatever show is entering its third season on, Hulu right now. I can't give a shit about that. I'm not saying other people shouldn't. I'm not saying that if you need to absent yourself from the conversation that's going on, the stimulating and, overwhelming information that's blanketing things. But I'm saying for me, I can't do it. And so as a media critic, can we take the time to unpack like, yo, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to be aware of. God, I wish like keyboard warriors hadn't co-opted the term woke, because right now is when I want to yell at people, stay woke. Like, this is what this phrase was designed for. We all need to be stay woke out here. And staying woke.
And that's part of why I wanted us to just like reveal that little bit of the tension that happens here in terms of like, I'm not afraid to be an ally in this space and also be wrong. And also, use my platform in ways that could be supportive, but that could also backfire, right? Like, right. I've been very vocal on Twitter about like encouraging allies to not put labor on Black folks to do the education work right now. And I did kind of just turn that on you, to us. And not that we're not going to be a part of this conversation, but that was a thing that I was like, well, I feel awkward being in a space with another Black person right now and having any kind of leadership. And so, like that was the conversation Ebony and I and Carolyn just had, was like, how do you navigate the power dynamics and the complicatedness of being mindful and conscious in such a complicated moment, right?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where people, they can very, accurately pick up on what's like authentic collaboration and what isn't. So if you've got, a member of your team, a Black woman, and you only ever involve her, and probably nominally, in like a decision-making process or an education session in moments like this, but then you never, ever, allow her to participate and, give her the opportunities or create space for her to grab those opportunities in leadership and collaboration, then that's very telling, And I think there's so many, like, I'm so angry for my sisters out there who are in workspaces who are like, oh, okay, well, it's falling to the organization to make a statement right now. I'm going to be the person who has to put that together, or people are going to be coming up to me and being like, what can I do? White people are going to be like, what can I do? And, what am I going to do? Like, not help? This is my life I'm fighting for here. Of course, I want them to be educated, but it's one more thing, we have to do. And it's just, it's exhausting.
Well, and I think that brings up this point of like, what does allyship mean right now? Like, what does that mean at all in general, right? And that is like, how do people who are allies in any kind of movement, but we're talking about this one in particular, like, what role do you play, right? And part of that is that if you are already educated in this space, one, you can never be too educated and you probably still need to learn some shit. And two, you can then go and tell those folks who are like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Hey, here are some resources. Here are some things to read. Here's places to donate. Because y'all, you should be giving money to organizations that are doing the work and know how to do the work. Like, I'm going to say that probably 5 more times today. And so I think that the conversation about what does it mean to be an ally? What does that look like? How do you not force Black folks to hold the labor in this moment when they're already dealing with all of the other shit of like staying alive and the emotional costs of that?
Whew. Yeah, I mean, I clearly I think white people need to be the ones talking to other white people about how white supremacy is real and something that needs to be dismantled. I've been thinking a lot about the Amy Cooper incident, actually, which I think was so revealing of a lot of what's happening right now. This is the incident where a white woman was walking her dog in a part of Central Park where dogs are supposed to be on their leash. She let her dog off the leash. A Black man asked her to put the dog back on the leash, and she, threatened not only to like call the police on him, but feigned distress and said, "I'm going to tell them that an African American man is threatening my life," etc. I think that a lot of white people have and myself included, to varying degrees at varying times in my life, might have a tendency to look at a situation like that and think, oh, well, I'm not, racist like her. I don't, wow, how could somebody do that? That's horrible. But without interrogating the way that white supremacy lives within us and having those really uncomfortable examinations of ourselves, as I think almost all white people who were raised in the white supremacy of the United States carry white supremacy within us to some degree or another. And we have to, there's a tendency or a desire to retreat into white comfort or, whatever. And I think white people should not be comfortable right now. Like, we need to be acknowledging the way, not that I don't know, the structural realities of white supremacy, and really, taking long, hard looks at ourselves and the way media shaped our perceptions, the way maybe, when we see films where Irish people, Europeans, American revolutionaries, whatever, riot, try to throw off their oppressors, we feel this stirring sense of pride. And yet, because of white supremacy, when we see Black people doing that, the reaction is more one of fear. Those are the subtle and often like subconscious ways that we are poisoned to perpetuate white supremacy. Anyway,
Yeah, like we're gonna get into a bunch of stuff in the course of this episode, but when we talk about like the need for white people to like recognize and sit with the discomfort they feel when white supremacy is called out, particularly when the people who are engaging in the like reprehensible behaviors are people who are self-professed liberals and progressives, right? Like Amy Cooper, yes, for instance, yes, we hear time and again these people saying like, this is not me. I've never done anything like this before. I'm so sorry for what I've done. And it's like, this white supremacy is a sickness, and it is something that takes over the entire way people like understand their place in the world and understand the place of other people in the world. Right. And this whole week is about, setting the streets on fire to light up the fact that the police in this country have been used as, a concierge service for white people for so long, because Black people and their Black bodies are determined to not be legitimately in certain places. And there are people who will swear up and down about their liberal bona fides. But when it comes right down to it, these are the same people who look askance at someone with, my skin color when I'm in a certain store, or if I'm in a certain neighborhood, opening the door to a house, if I'm driving a certain car. And they don't see the contradiction there at all, because white supremacy means that it's not a contradiction for them,
Yeah. I do want to bring up an aside, a bit of an aside here too, in terms of like, this isn't just about white people doing this work, that white supremacy becomes so infiltrated in our minds that like other people of color have these deep senses of anti-blackness or like pro-whiteness that is inherent in their communities. And so I'm thinking about like, I'm Middle Eastern, and there's so much anti-Black sentiment in Middle Eastern culture. We did an interview with Caden Mack of 18 Million Rising, who was talking about anti-Asian racism and how we need to Asian communities need to be mindful of being in solidarity with Black communities right now, because there is such this rise to attain whiteness by all of these people, all of these other communities that are also oppressed by white supremacy. And the white supremacy pits different groups against each other, when really we should all be working together to find liberation. And so,
white supremacy is such powerful currency that you have, non-Black people of color, desperately grasping at any kind of proximity to whiteness that will grant them, like some of the power, some of the legitimacy, some of the, political weight that it takes to not exist in the same political space as Black people and Blackness, like it's a hell of a drug. And so you have, diasporic communities, from Africa, for instance, that nevertheless are being told, like, you're different than American Blacks. Like, there is nothing more hated than American Blackness,
Yeah, and I mean, I hope this doesn't seem trifling at this moment, but we are, often largely an organization concerned with media. And, I think, certainly films, there are so many films like Crash and Green Book and so on that kind of purport to be like critical of racism and white supremacy, but are actually the function they actually serve is to make white people comfortable and to be reassuring, because it's like, oh, well, I'm not as racist as the characters in that film, therefore I'm fine, I'm enlightened, I can look down on these people. And that is exactly what white people, by and large, systemically don't need to not do. We need to again be uncomfortable and recognize the ways in which we are infected by white supremacy. And I think it has been interesting on Twitter these past few days that there does seem to be an acknowledgement, at least, and some critical thinking happening around the ways in which, for instance, cop narratives on television and in films absolutely work to perpetuate, so many of the ideas and perceptions that racial injustice and police injustice, are kind of like founded on.
Oh yeah, like, have you been seeing, I don't know if you follow Ice-T on Twitter, but, the dude has been just like absolutely on fire, talking about, the way that police in this country have, run rampant, and are instigators of this violence. And I'm like, dude, like, this is amazing. Like, you are a longtime, like, linchpin member of like a tentpole crime procedural, like global crime procedural, I mean, you talk about crime procedurals, crime dramas, police dramas, whatever, like Law and Order is right up there. And I think Law and Order SVU, has it eclipsed like the original Recipe in terms of longevity? That show has been on since, 2 BC. And so I'm like, this is, and I am absolutely clear, y'all. Like, I would not, try and dance my way around this. I mean, just last week, I was getting ready to give a freak out about the show, an extended freak out about Martin Beck, this Swedish crime procedural that I've been watching. I watch so much of this stuff. If you look in my, Amazon Prime queue, the additional channels I'm subscribed to, the algorithm knows me, like, I watch so much of this stuff at the same time that I'm saying, abolish the police. They were always designed to be, the white person's, militia that was never about justice for all. It was never about serving every community. Like, these are just, the heirs of the slave catchers. Like, I can say that with one side of my mouth, while at the same time knowing that I'm going to go back downstairs later today, and as a method of comfort, I'm going to seek into shows that I've known and loved for, years. And so I might watch like episodes of Elementary. Yo, the cops are everywhere. It is hard. It would be difficult to find a show that does not have a sympathetic cop character, and in fact doesn't have multiple sympathetic cop characters. If you're trying to sell a show in Hollywood right now, write some kind of bootleg crime procedural, you automatically have a leg up. We are obsessed with Law and Order, but Law and Order of a particular type.
And part of, and we've definitely talked about this before, but I think it's relevant to bring up again, as part of the appeal of those shows is that it shows that the state is good. Mm-hmm. Right? It shows that there is, quote unquote, law and order, right? It is a completely false narrative and a false world than we live in. And there is a comfort to, well, I wouldn't get shot in this universe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like my rapist would get tried in this universe. Because
not only that, but I would be taken seriously if I report a rape. I would be taken seriously. My rapist would be caught. That person would go on trial, be convicted. And that represents a form of justice. Like, at every level, there is myth making, and we absolutely cannot extricate ourselves from it, or seemingly have no desire to.
And here's the thing is, like, Ebony, you're watching these as someone who is very educated and knowledgeable in this space. And so, like, while it definitely, like, I think media has an impact on us no matter what, whether we are aware of it or not. It has less of an impact, right? It's not like you are watching these shows and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, man, the police are fucking great, right? Like, you're not, your politics aren't shifting in that regard, at least. But for the vast majority of people who have never really thought about the damning institutions of the police state, of the prison industrial complex, like, this is, it is not, Law and Order seems real. Like, it seems like this is a genuine, like, representation, although probably a little bit sensationalized, of our criminal justice system. Because every fucking goddamn show or movie you watch, it's just get a lawyer. We created this system so that people could have a fair trial, that, you 12 jury member, blah, 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 like all of the founding bullshit around this stuff. It's reiterated again and again and again. And as I started thinking about this today, I was like, it's in all of our superhero movies. Every single fucking one of them is either a vigilante for the state or they actually work directly with the state. And those are the characters that we, like, dress up as at conventions, that we identify and have fun with. Right? Like,
yeah, and think how many, times we see in these shows and in these movies, someone acts outside of the bounds of the law, and we are meant to celebrate that because we entrust certain people with this extrajudicial power, and we just trust that it's going to be for the benefit of all, even though it directly contravenes the the laws and the statutes that they themselves have vowed to uphold. So it's like, oh, this person, we couldn't get them convicted any other way. So, something was planted on them. And as an audience, we're supposed to be like, well, there was no other way for this rapist to,
right?
Be put away.
We know that they were bad, so
yeah,
it's
exactly.
okay.
And it's like, and so this notion that that we will trust these people completely uncritically is absolutely the lubricant that this state apparatus needs to proceed. And, I love, Anita, that you say that, I'm educated, so I'm perhaps not consuming this stuff as uncritically as other people. Like I said, I absolutely indict myself. I have to continually remind myself that if something happens, the cops are not here to serve me. And for those of you who are like, okay, well, you talk about prison abolition or police abolition. What are we supposed to do if a crime is committed? Do you know that many, many people already don't have access to police service? Like, they would never think of calling the police because the police already don't help them. So if communities have already come up with solutions and are in the midst of coming up with more solutions so that we don't need a police force, why is it something that you are so attached to? Like, how does it service you? What does it give to you? And I'll tell you what it gives to you. It's one of the, pillars of white supremacy, and people refuse to let it go.
Yeah. I want to bring up one more thing in the media arena. There's a book called Enlightened Racism: The Cosby Show Audience and the Myth of the American Dream that came out in 1992. And it's super loaded in terms of the fact that it is actually a study about the Cosby Show. And it's a little bit hard to read anything about the Cosby Show, knowing what Bill Cosby, the monster that he is. But I think it is relevant to the conversation we're having, because the idea, and we've already used the word enlightenment in this, enlightened wokeness, et cetera, in this recording today. The idea is that that the media perpetuates these myths about families like the Cosby family, right? That white Americans loved this Black family that was like upper middle class. They were professionals. They didn't really talk about racism or any of the difficulties it would be to exist as they are. And so the book sort of breaks apart some of that idea of this enlightened racism, right? So like one of the quotes in here is, "The Cosby Show provides its white audience with relief not only from fear, but also from responsibility." Right? Which is,
to go back to briefly the Amy Cooper incident that I mentioned earlier, I think with Christian Cooper, the Black man on, the other side of that, like there was definitely a significant amount among white people of a kind of like, and I mean, like, I love anyone who geeks out about like something that they really love, like birds or whatever. Like I think Christian Cooper seems like a delightful, wonderful person. But you could tell that there was a way in which we, as white people collectively, were like comfortable with him, and that and in a way that we wouldn't have been with. Certain with other Black men.
Absolutely.
And it's fucked. It's like fucked up. These like judgments that we make about like, well, so because implied in that is like, well, I could understand her reacting this way if the guy were, dressed differently, if his voice was different, if he spoke English in a different way, whatever, like, that's racism in and of itself that we need to very closely like interrogate and push back against in ourselves.
Oh yeah, like the complicated choreography that is demanded by folks who absolutely make respectability a tenet of their support. So Christian Cooper is he's an illegitimate target of someone like Amy Cooper because he is well-dressed, he is well-spoken, he wears glasses, he's doing this nerd-ass activity in Central Park, whatever. And it's like, come on, if he looked like, the media's depiction of a thug, people would be falling over themselves to say, okay, well, what did he do before the camera was turned on?
Right.
How did he provoke her? And let's be clear, people
Amy
already
Cooper
said this.
Amy Cooper called Phonon was no saint or whatever, there'd be like those stories. I keep thinking about this tweet that Austin Walker, games journalist, writer, tweeted years ago after Mike Brown was killed, and it said, the problem when the murdering officer, whose name escapes me right now, when the murdering officer said that Mike Brown looked like a demon to him, the problem isn't with the officer's eyes; it's with what America told him demons look like. Yeah. Right. And like that tweet to me is just like, it just gets right at the heart of it, of like, how anti-Blackness just seeps into so much of white perception of the world and our place in the world relative to other people.
And I think this is super 100% related to how we talk about these protests right now as well.
Yes.
Right. So in addition to whose life is valuable based on respectability politics, based on the idea of like the quote unquote model minority, that if you are a criminal, you're like quote unquote, right, that you are not worthy to live, like that somehow
your life is kind of forfeit, so
I think it's related to, and Ebony, when you were talking about like in these crime dramas and these superhero shows, you go outside of the law and it's like, oh, well, it's okay because it was the right thing to do. But we can't we would never give that benefit of the doubt to Black protesters right now, right? Like it's not, the media is not unrelated. The fictional media that we engage with is not unrelated to the way that the media responds to and that we as the public respond to this. So like there is extreme violence happening in these protests, and it is mostly at the hands of the cops. Like the cops have come in, and it's like they all have the same goddamn playbook, right? Because they all came in, they all provoked violence, and then they used their provocations of violence to attack protesters. Then the cities set up curfews, like locked entire cities down. And in cities like ours in LA, they actually brought out the goddamn National Guard.
Yeah.
Because Black people were in the streets being beaten up by cops.
Oh, yeah. And let's also make this clear. Cities that are imposing curfews are also shutting down the mass transit that people are using to get to these protests, but also that people depend upon every day. They are bottlenecking traffic. They are shutting down roads. They are making it physically impossible for people to actually exit the area, on short notice, the way that is demanded of them by the imposition of these curfews. And they are using that then as an additional excuse to target, harass, and arrest folks. And there is absolutely no way in which the behavior of the police, the National Guard, these paramilitary groups, like there's absolutely no way in which what is happening is not the direct result of their actions.
And our dumbass mayor in LA actually shut down COVID testing sites as if that has anything to do with anything.
Right.
So I do want to bring this up, though, because I think it's very, very important that we acknowledge that the police are responding with brutality to protests about brutality, that the media is not covering all of the beautiful community support that's happening right now with barbecues happening in the middle of protests and people dancing and just whatever. But I also want to make sure that we acknowledge that we're not doing what we just said, right? That we should not be, I guess tone policing is the word that keeps coming to mind here, that there is no right way to protest against a system that is literally killing you. That you don't get to come out here as someone on the sidelines of this and say, well, peaceful protests are the only way to go, or that bashing in a car window or setting something to fire is the wrong way to protest. You can have opinions about violence and you can have opinions about it, but you do not get to sit here in judgment of people who are literally fighting for their lives, demanding that that they stop being murdered in the streets.
Well, yeah. And I mean, you also don't get to, occupy any moral high ground if what you are saying is, breaking, property for, corporations, breaking a Target window is more offensive and more important to me than the fact that you could be murdered in your bed by an agent of the state and that person will never face any consequences for that. If you're going to say that shit, say it with your whole chest. We want in this country, we want the effect of militant action, but we want it safely displaced by decades, and we want other people to do the work. So we go every June to, pride celebrations, forgetting that, 50 years ago at Stonewall, people were throwing fucking bricks. You don't get to tell me that, in the fight for my life that I need to, I don't know, not throw punches. I'm fighting for my life here. And if you will not listen, as you have proven yourself not to listen to, people like Colin Kaepernick taking a knee on the football field, then absolutely we will do what it takes, to make sure that you are paying attention.
So this next thing I'm going to say is not about voting at all, but I'm using this as an example. Emma Goldman said, if voting did anything, it would be illegal. And don't argue with me about that. That's not the conversation we're having right now. But I'm bringing
people
up,
are already firing up those tweets.
No, and I don't
argue with you about it.
I have much more complicated feelings about it. But I'm bringing it up to say that if the system supported protesting, then you aren't changing anything. If the system is okay with you challenging it, you're not really challenging it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that's a really important thing for people to start to understand.
People act like the government has a fucking suggestion box, and that if you just fill out a card, someone will read it and be like, oh, it turns out the people don't like police brutality anymore. We should stop putting that out.
Yeah.
Like,
so go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, please.
So this morning I woke up, and you know how Twitter will sometimes like algorithmically kind of collect news stories and kind of put them in front of you. So I had this thing, headline in front of me on Twitter that was like, in some areas, police join with protesters and march with them. And like, okay, so first of all, that whole framing, like right now, it's pro cop. It recenters like the idea of like the good cops, the cops who get it, the cops who understand. It totally sidelines like the grievances and the very real like issues that should be centered right now. But also like this idea, like I think this clip of Cornel West on CNN has been making the rounds a lot on Twitter and social media lately, in which he says like the system cannot reform itself, right? And also just to mention, like, if there were good fucking cops, like they would turn in all the bad cops, right? But they don't, because like the system is working as it is designed, as it is intended to work. This is what police are for. And, and so therefore like these narratives of like, oh, we can get along with the police and we can, the conflict with the systems of oppression is core to what is happening right now. It's a necessary part of it.
Yeah, and the answer, before people fix their Twitter fingers to suggest this, the answer is not more black cops or more women cops or, gay cops. Like, that is not the answer, When the master's house will never, dismantle, or the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house, right? But also, like, if you voluntarily opt in to certain systems, then the sort of the fact of your identity can and often is obscured behind what is now a more primary identity, which is the blue one, like I'm in shock by the ways in which there are any people anywhere who are able to willfully dismiss what the police are doing right now. I live down the street from a police station. I got helicopters over my house nonstop now. And the reality is that even though things have not kicked off in my neighborhood right now, these people who say like, oh, you shouldn't, protest in a certain way because you give the cops an excuse. They need an excuse because they already have an excuse. They are the excuse. They are the excuse.
Yeah. There's a lot of people out there who see, protest riots by Black people as violence, but don't see the actions of the state as violence. They probably don't see all those white men kitted out with guns and paramilitary gear who stormed, capitals and courthouses in recent weeks, as violence, right? But when Black people, smash a window out of rage, and righteous indignation over like centuries of racial injustice and abuse and murder at the hands of the state, like then that is violence.
I'm so worried and I'm so angry. I lived in Minneapolis. I was in the Twin Cities for 10, 12 years. I still have family there. I still have a lot of friends there. And I'm so worried. But it is a larger worry that is choking me. And there's no place to put it, I have been, at the same time, unable to wrest my eyes away from social media because I have to know what's happening, up to the minute. And, I'm involved in various community organizing groups. So I want to know like, oh, okay, are we, sending money to this bail fund instead of this one instead right now? Or, can I help boost like a call for street medics? Like I want to be part of that, while at the same time knowing that every tweet I see, every Instagram post I see, every Facebook post I see is one more breath I can't take that's being stopped in my chest. And in the middle of a pandemic, when I know that my community is already facing a death sentence, when this fuck shit administration is sending people back to die because other people, white people, need servants everywhere they go, whether they need to be serviced getting their hair cut or at Applebee's or American Eagle or whatever bullshit they gotta leave their houses for. They're sending my people out there to die. And then to have this happen, to know that the protesters who are out on the street right now are in danger of becoming affected by COVID. Like, what kind of 1-2 fucking punch is this for a community to have to withstand?
It's honestly, and I'm not trying to undermine anything you're saying. I just watching a lot of that footage and seeing so many people without masks on was so hard.
And then
like what the cops aren't wearing. The cops aren't wearing shit, first of all, and also like several protesters aren't. And I'm so worried about the spike in these particular communities that's going to happen.
Right. Because these people are going to come home and they've been exposed. And if they get sick and they pass it on, we already know that they're not going to get the treatment they deserve and need because of the color of their fucking skin. And I'm just sick of it. I'm sick of it. And so if I see one more goddamn Martin Luther King quote out of context, on Twitter, I'm going to lose my fucking mind. I'm going to lose my fucking mind.
You know what's like, I mean, my God, have you seen the white people telling like Martin Luther King's son about his dad, right? Like Martin Luther King's son is like quoting his father's talking about how like a riot is the language of the unheard, and white people be like, yeah, but he totally wouldn't condone this, like that's not what he meant, or like whatever the fuck. It's like, oh my God, like as Hari Kondabolu said in a tweet, like and I've heard the phrase before, like the audacity of caucasity. It is like staggering sometimes. My God.
It is just, it's mind bending. And I know that, oh God, like I had so much stuff I wanted to say and, bring up during the course of this episode that obviously I didn't get to, but I want to make sure that we let people know, even if the conversation isn't over right now, but I want to let people know that like, we're going to be putting a shit ton of resources in the show notes today, from organizations, Black-led organizations that you can support, for readings that you can and should be doing, for other people you can be listening to, podcasts, radio shows, like there are many ways that we all can be involved in this work. Although we've been talking, primarily about like in the streets, like physical protesting, that is not the only way, nor is it the way that we need to be looking in the long haul at making the changes that we need to. Like, we need community organizers for the long haul. We need, this is a bad, metaphor to use, but we need foot soldiers in this fight who will, help route things logistically, who will help, donate to bail funds, who will sign up to be, a court support for people, who will check in on folks, like we need lots and lots of help. This cannot be one more bloody summer, one more violent protest that then we look back on 2 years from now and we're lifting up the names of more dead Black people. It cannot happen.
And I think that that's super key, is that it's not one weekend in the streets, right? Like we've had weekends in the streets. This is not the first time people have protested the murder of Black folks. of all genders, which I think is really important here because often Black women get erased from this narrative, especially trans Black women.
Yep.
But that this is about agitating long term, right? This is about agitating for real change, doing the actual work. And so I had several people reach out to me over the last few days, several white people reach out to me being like, what do I do? What do I do? And so like, you know, without providing an entire crash course in one tweet or whatever, people who want to do something right now, I would say start with these. Amplify Black voices. Donate to organizations who are already doing the work. They know how to do the work. They know where the resources need to go. Give them your money. And as someone who runs a nonprofit, like it all matters. Like if you can only give $5 or $20, like do it. If you can give monthly donations to these organizations, please do that. It'll just be automatically taken out of your bank account or your credit card, and you will fund that work for the long haul. So like, let the people who know what they're doing do the work. And also a lot of those organizations have volunteer opportunities. So look into what other ways that you can participate. Educate yourself on the legacy and history of systemic racism. No matter what piece of allyship you're a part of, right? Like whatever your privilege is, you will never master that, right? Like you're never going to be the most perfect ally ever. You can always learn more. I recently encountered some white folks who, not related to this, it was something different, but that acted like they already knew everything that there was to know about oppression, and it was a lot of white fragility happening, and it was really troubling. And so just a reminder that like you can always read more, you can always do more, you can always like keep yourself constantly updated. Follow Black voices on Twitter. Just like having them in your feed every day, seeing the issues that are coming up, and then amplifying those. And talk to your non-Black friends and family about systemic racism. Stop reaching out to your Black friends about what to do and talk to your other family members and shit about what to do. Don't ask your Black friends how you can help. Figure it out on your own. Come talk to other people like me. Google it, whatever.
This is what I'm saying. Google is available to all y'all.
To everyone,
like,
y'all.
You have an internet connection. Google works just the same for you as it does for me.
Don't center your own feelings and opinions on this shit because nobody gives a fuck. Like, I don't mean to be crass about it. You can have your own like private conversations with people, but like this is not about you. And don't share misinformation. So do your research before you start retweeting shit. I know I've made mistakes like that in the past. Like, do your research. Make sure that the photos you're sharing are real photos. Make sure that the stories you're sharing are real stories.
Do not share photos of protesters whose faces are unobscured. Law enforcement is absolutely doing contract tracing. Like they are absolutely combing social media to find these people. Do not do it. Do not be an unwitting tool of the state. Don't
share the horrific violent videos over and over and over again, forcing them into timelines. Like, So, yes, just don't stop doing that.
Yes.
If people want to see the very well documented aggressive violent footage of Black people being harmed and murdered, you can find it. They can find it. You don't need to share it and amplify it. So that's my little like quick, if you need something right now, those are the things I would recommend doing.
Love it.
And if you're in a position to at protests as a white person, be willing, be ready to put your body between the police and Black people because the police are far less likely to brutalize you than they are to brutalize any Black people.
Yeah, that's what they call the white shield, and it's real. Yeah, it's real. So if you were one of those people that proudly displayed like a safety pin, avatar or bought safety pins or whatever, and said, I'm willing to do what it takes, after, the election of 2016, this is what it means, like sometimes it requires, if you're on the front lines, being aware, keeping your eyes open, and putting yourself between these folks.
Yeah. So, in the show notes, we're going to link to a bunch of the stuff we talked about, a ton of resources and articles and organizations that you can support. Because again, if you can, support the organizations doing the work.
And
keep saying
don't give
that's
money to Sean King.
Do not give your money to Sean King. Holy shit.
Like,
I don't know why people
should
keep
know
doing
this
that
by now, but don't do
Fuck.
it. Like,
I love on the Black Lives Matter website. There's I'll also throw this up there too. There's like a really great like another great list of like ways that you can get involved, and literally at the top of it is do not give your money to Sean King. Like y'all,
like, how many times? How many exposés? Come on,
dude, for real. So yeah, please like do your work here. Be involved. You know, you can feel frustrated and sad and scared and helpless, and you know, you can feel all the things you need to feel, and you can also get to work.
Oh, love it. Wrap it up, girl. Yes.
Are we
sad,
done?
but you can also get to work.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I feel like it's what we do every day, you know?
Yeah.
Thanks to y'all for joining us on this, I think, really important conversation that we all sort of felt like we needed to have. And, you know, this isn't going to be the last of them. And we hope that it was helpful to you. And we hope that you're having these conversations with your communities as well. So thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. And, you know, I'm not going to say all the stuff, but I do want to shout out the people who help us make the podcast every week, which is our engineer, Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Full Circus. Y'all stay safe out there. Be a part of the resistance. Do your fucking work and do your homework. And
stay woke.
Stay woke. But like actually, not like the bullshit. Not like, you know, calling the cops.
Yeah, the way like old white men
dog.
have, you know, taken the term and used it in their, I don't know, Allstate insurance commercials. No, that's not what we're talking about.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.